Good morning, everyone. I'm Miguel Cervantes, COO of Makerspace Manila, and I will be your moderator for today's session. It is officially day three of that International Design Conference, and I hope that you've been enjoying and taking inspiration from the sessions that we've had so far. You can expect a whole lot more design inspiration in the coming days up until the 26th. You can check out Design Center's Facebook page for the full lineup. Today's session of the IDC 2020 is brought to you by our partners. Adobo Magazine, our official media partner. Buensalido Architects and British Council, our event partners. You know the drill. Before we start our questions with David Garcia, I'll be asking you a poll question first just to get you warmed up. In the age of COVID-19, what map would you be most interested in making? Areas with fast internet, grocery and pharmacy accessibility, human food traffic, testing facilities, or hospitals? You can start by typing down your answers now, and we'll check back on the results later. I'll be turning over the spotlight to David in a bit, but first, I'm reminding everyone to take their questions down and comment them below so we can discuss it later during our Fireside Chat. For today's session, we will be joined by David Garcia. David is a trained geographer, environmental planner, and geospatial analyst. He currently works at the Ministry of Mapping, a geospatial collective in the Philippines, while taking up his PhD in Geospatial Science in New Zealand. Before taking up his PhD, David was devoted to the academe as an educator at UP Diliman, and eventually as a scholar at the University of London. He has worked with the UN, crisis mapping Haiyan affected areas, and after returning from his scholarship, worked in crisis mapping again for Marawi. These days, he loves making maps of our home, the Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, David Garcia.
And play.
I am Mapmaker David, and welcome to my masterclass. I find that title a bit or label a bit funny and interesting, and also I see it as a privilege too. Um, that's why I thank the Design Center of the Philippines for this opportunity to give back to and serve the country, Philippines, a country that I love, to this presentation. Today, I'd like to share with you the little I know about how to map an island in the Pacific. There are three parts. First is about a philosophical and fundamental discussion about taking mapping seriously. Here I show you a bit of contemporary trends and also what I know so far about what mapping means and what mapping takes. So this is more of a broad discussion for anyone, whether you're a journalist or a designer, activist, student, a parent. Um, Here I would like to open your eyes about different ways of understanding the making of maps. And then we're going to go to quick cartographic techniques, where I show you very useful skills and very useful methods of using free and open source geospatial technologies and also open geospatial data in your everyday life. I might also drop a bit of career advice. And finally, a story. It's a practical and also a bit emotional one about me and my colleagues and friends and the communities we've worked for and with over the past decade or so. How we made, shared, and used maps, especially in Super Typhoon Haiyan after that happened, and also the siege of Marawi. And I would like it to be inspiring and hopeful for everyone. So let's go and start this journey. There's a popular saying across the Pacific: if you want to know where you're going, then remember where you came from. I'm going to repeat that. There's a popular saying across the Pacific: if you want to know where you're going, then remember where you came from. Ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makararating sa paroroonan. Those who cannot look back at past paths will never reach their destination. I think this is a powerful quote to begin with, and for me, it's a very humbling um, piece of wisdom from our ancestors. Because no matter how far we go in the world as Filipinos, it's very important for us to look back and to recollect and to stay grounded and stay immersed in our history and our geography and our identity and why we're doing what we're doing. I also learned that this saying is actually popular across the large ocean states of Moana Oceania, also known as the Pacific. I'm gonna tell a story about that later. So, where do we come from? We come from the greatest navigators in the world, and I'm not joking. Thousands of years ago, a people called the Austronesians started a migration from the island that is now known as Taiwan to what we know now as Southeast Asia. There were no funny borders before, and they were moving across the islands and trading and settling in places new to them and discovering places that they haven't visited before, as seen in this map. So let's say from Taiwan, our ancestors went even as far as Madagascar, which is known as Madagascar, and all the way to here in Aotearoa, which is known by its colonial name New Zealand, even to Hawaii. That is why we have so many things in common linguistically, even in the food, even in the attitudes about life. And I think that is an amazing story that we need to hold on because our ancestors were geographers and map makers too in their terms. So let's remember that, and we're gonna follow this story later. So for example, if you look at the technology that was used by our ancestors, there are similarities across the Pacific, and of course, the technology evolved through thousands of years. But some of the words remain. For example, bangka, we call the boat bangka, and uh, the people who were later called Polynesians call that ship baka or waka, and I think that's amazing. There are other words, let's say like rangi in Tereo Maori and langit in the Philippines, and I could drop more words, and I would just like us to dwell on that for a few moments before I delve into other aspects of mapping. Right. And this is me. I'm David. I like making maps. I make nice maps sometimes. And there's a common joke amongst my friends that I look like that person at the center by a historical accident. And um, it's just funny that uh, this always comes up in my other talks. But if you look at it, we are Austronesians because if you look at this person, this was sent to me by my friend in Madagascar. That shows okay, we our ancestors are really moving around the world, and we love traveling. And if it, I just showed this because if you're curious about how I look, so this is me. I'm also an Austronesian and a Filipino. And these are the maps that I make, usually with open source technologies and open data. For example, this is a poster I made, I think, in December 2018, just before Christmas. I made a previous map about 100 largest islands of the Philippines, and then I later thought and felt, what if I do that for the rest of the world? This is called relief shading, and I'm going to show you a bit of my process behind the making of these. And this is Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand, and I live in a city right now here in Christchurch, where I'm doing a PhD in Geospatial Science. And a lot of the things that I'm going to show you is part of that um, PhD work. And I would like to acknowledge not only the scholarship given by the New Zealand government, but also the extreme generosity and courage and hope and life and space provided to me by our relatives, the Maori people. We are 8,000 kilometers away from each other, but believe me or not, we are closer than than what our geography and history teachers taught us. More of that later. And this is where I come from. Come from a town called San Fernando, and I see Mount Arayat every morning when we have coffee. This is my island, Luzon. That's where I come from. In my previous career, I was also working for the United Nations, where we were developing guidelines about sustainable urban development. And my job there was to make maps and also to provide insights about spatial planning. And this is a map I made for a report for the agency called UN Habitat, funded by the Spanish aid agency and also with the now Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. It's called the Achieving Sustainable Development Project, and the map you see here is from OpenStreetMap. It's an open map data that I'm gonna show later. And here I used quantum GIS to process and visualize the OpenStreetMap data. In that particular project, we were also using open data to um, with the local government and local community to think about how to expand the city sustainably, because we all know that the cities of the Philippines are urbanizing very fast, right? And sometimes I'm involved in these projects, like book projects. When I was doing my master's in geospatial analysis in the University of London system, I did a side gig with a team making maps and doing research for this book called Shaping Cities. It's part of the Global Urban Age project. What I'm trying to say is that my map making skills have taken me to geography, have taken me to urban planning, have taken me to urban studies. And this is how I experienced digital cartography and other experiences, which I will tell you later. Right. So let's go to part one, taking mapping seriously, the basics. When we talk about maps, we are usually taught that maps are about representation, and that is correct. But if you really step back and look at the history of the world, look at larger processes, it's not just about representation. Why? The world today is urbanizing, the world today is digitalizing, and the world today is precaritizing. These are three very important processes that are reshaping everything from the way we live, the way we work, the way we think, even the way we feel. Everything's becoming faster and faster in terms of the urbanization, supported by digitalization. There's a huge demand for most of the work to be automated and also encoded and packaged, and it's part of this historical march of capitalism. And as the world urbanizes and digitalizes, our crises intensifies, whether in employment or in climate change disasters, in geopolitics, in how indigenous peoples are treated. And I would just like to put this as an important backdrop where I locate my work as a map maker. And every time I decide on a project, I think about these processes so I can um, navigate the places I make maps for properly and hopefully make a bit of change. It's very heavy, but we need to see this reality together. And against that backdrop, we expect mapping, whether you're a map maker or um, put it simply, not a map maker. We expect mapping, including geographic information systems, to make a difference in the world today, in this world. And it's a big demand because these all these problems are happening at the same time. But our skill sets are very limited, and even our sense of history is not perfect. Also, part of that context is this change from left to right. It's a very simplistic one, but you could see from the left is an old model of cartography back in those days. Let's say when the Spanish Empire was carving out the Philippines, when the U.S. Army and the U.S. colonizers, imperialists were also trying to annex the Philippines. You can see there that there's the way of mapping was very centralized. or the way of doing cartography was very centralized. There's a central agency, usually the state or the crown, or very strong colonial administration. And from that um, central body, that agency sends out surveyors, sends out engineers, sends out um, ethnographers even to map out and profile, even put a hierarchy over the peoples of a place, let's say indigenous peoples, citizens, etc. And it's a very, very traditional setup. And then today, we are seeing a more complex arrangement where the government agencies are still there, the indigenous peoples are still there, we're still here. We are also indigenous peoples of our islands, the citizens. But there are more interconnections because there are more opportunities provided by the latest application, implementation of networked and digital information technology. So we could argue that today's systems are more decentralized, distributed, and hybrid, but that also does not remove the fact that certain actors are still very powerful, like the government or like universities and corporations. And there's always a tension between these two ways of making maps. One is very centralized, very controlling, and one is more democratic, more open. And I hope that we move towards the second one, where even citizens and many different peoples of the world are empowered to make their own maps. Right. Here comes crowdsourcing. This is the latest trend today in digital work, and it comes from that term outsourcing. So now you see today that a lot of work, even mapping, is outsourced and it's very precarious. It's a response to that backdrop I mentioned earlier about the the pitfalls of the current stage of capitalism we have today, wherein governments are reducing support on welfare and businesses also are trying to pass on costs and their externalities to other parts of society. And even now in mapping, believe me or not, um, even with the advent of AI, you still need manual labor to classify uh, satellite images. And that is part of crowdsourcing. So again, this is a very important backdrop that we need to realize in terms of mapping. Crowdsourced mapping is mapping. And I think it's gonna become more popular in the years to come. In this trend, the cartographer is both a producer and a consumer. Hence the word prosumer or producers, which I think is a more appropriate term than this term called volunteer. Anyway, here comes OpenStreetMap, which is one of the main topics I'm gonna talk about. It is like the Wikipedia of maps. And I love OpenStreetMap because it is a digital free editable map of the world. And there are many OpenStreetMappers across the world, thousands of active users every day. And it started in London in 2004. Right. And what I'm trying to understand recently is how does the technology work for human and why? And I'm gonna show bits and pieces of this throughout the presentation until the geospatial story. So before we delve into that, back to the fundamentals, I would like to say this early that it is important to see maps not only as visuals. And I know you came here as people interested in visualization, but also it would be very powerful and helpful for you to understand that mapping is not just limited to visualization in real life. And our job is shaped by forces outside the visualization industry, and we need to be aware of that. So the first addition I'd like to show you is mapping is a way of knowing. And this is the most popular one. When you make maps, it means that the map has to be accurate, and we need to reduce the error, we need to reduce the uncertainty in the data. And this is where the mainstream traditions, let's say surveying or geomatics engineering, or my previous training, geospatial analysis, comes. And here, Uh, the people who focus on this representational view and approach to mapping focus on data quality. That is one of the main metrics. The next tradition or the next mapping approach is mapping as consuming. And this is where the fields of cartography and geospatial science are influenced by, say, usability studies or user experience. And here, the work is measured in terms of, let's say, the communicability of the map or the value that the map adds to the organization, the user's goals, and the issues they encounter while they say use the map. It's a pragmatic approach to mapping. And then third is mapping as claiming. In this tradition, mapping is a way to address very critical social issues. That's why I put a bit of I sketched a Game of Zones icon there. Here we acknowledge mapping as knowing that equality is important. We also acknowledge the pragmatic uses of mapping, but we're not limited by that. We look at mapping from the perspective of power, from the perspective of ethics, from the perspective of rights. Who is being benefited by the mapping? Who is disadvantaged by the mapping? Who is included? Who is excluded? And I think it's a very important tradition. Excuse me. Critical approach. And here comes my suggestion, which came from other scholars, that I think we also need to look at mapping as labor. And that's why we're here. That's why you are interested in my talk. You are interested in um, the intensity and the types of work that map makers do and what it looks like in real life. Because I think I put this forward in response to these three, because I think our perspectives as laborers are often ignored or silenced, or sometimes we're afraid to speak about it. And if you look at the current trend about crowdsourcing, it's not just about sourcing, it's actually work crowd working. And the geographic information, let's say in projects like OpenStreetMap, is not just volunteered but labored. Has to actually go out and collect the data, create the data, select the data, process the data. That is labor. And if you look at maps not only from a representational, pragmatic, or critical perspective, but from the perspective of labor, I think we can learn more about the craft, the industry, and our choices how to move through it. Right. I also drew this as part of part one because um, I've been having this series of reflections that when I read the books about mapping, the whether it's technical or the recreational ones, the story that we're told is okay, you go out, you collect data, and then process it, you organize it, you clean the data, and you say ask the user sometimes, and then you publish and use it, and then done. But I think it's not a realistic way of looking at mapping because from from my experience, it's not a straight line. You collect data and then you process data, and then the mirror wants to change the map, and then the users also have a different view of what the mirror sees in the map, and then you collect more data, and then the funding runs out, and then there are more stakeholders. Let's say there are more people in the barangay who says, "Okay, you forgot this," and then your office tells, "Oops, you forgot this." Also, demand from headquarters who's funding the project, and then a disaster happens, like a typhoon, and then people change their minds, and people need to eat first, and then uh, and then you laugh because it's madness too. What I want to say is it's important to for us to sometimes complicate things, and I learned this over the past 10 years that even though the outputs are clear or they're supposed to be, we also need to learn how to read the landscape and also serve the people at the same time and also deliver outputs. And also, my comment is it's very hard. More of that later. Right. I'm going to end this part one by saying that mapping is about space, knowledge, and power. At the end of the day, in a mapping project, there are many interests involved, including our interests. the interests of the academe, the interests of the politicians, people who fund the project. And I think by putting this front and center, even the people who are just new to this kind of talk, I hope it helps you choose the projects later. So that's the end of the first part in the masterclass, and now we are going to proceed to part two, which is the practical part, and also exciting part. It's about quick cartographic techniques, about shaded relief, quantum GIS, which is a free and open source geospatial software, and OpenStreetMap. I'm gonna, in other words, I'm gonna show you my secret sauce, which was taught to me by other cartographers. This is a sample of a shaded relief. I love shaded relief because it shows a very, in other words, artistic rendering of the landscape. And there's a whole tradition. There are people like Tom Patterson and and Tharp who spend their whole careers perfecting this cartographic tradition. And what I'm going to show you is also limited because after 10 years of doing this, I think I still don't know what I'm doing. These are just examples. You can do a top-down view of a shaded relief and also an oblique view, a side view, which is very nice. So if you want to learn more about relief shading, I think Tom Patterson's resources are very nice. If you want to delve deep, Tom Patterson he- heads or used to head the Mountain Cartography Group of the International Cartographic Association. Here are more examples and inspiration. I've been looking at these works for quite some time now, and it's just makes me wonder. And maybe it's because it's almost 3 a.m. here in New Zealand when I'm recording this. Makes me wonder that this is such a privilege to be given the time and space to learn an art, and I hope more Filipino map makers are given this chance to develop their expertise. Right. So this is it. This is the technique from my end. What I do is I use Quantum GIS. It's free and open, and please support the project. We're in. I prepare, I download, I collect, and prepare what is called a digital elevation model, which is a raster file comprised of pixels, and each pixel has an elevation value. And then after preparing that, doing a bit of tweak here and cutting it, etc., I input the file in Blender, the raster file in Blender, which shows the relief map. And then in an image editing software like Photoshop or the free versions of it, I combine it with colors and other layers, etc. So this is a method. This is not the ultimate relief shading method. I just found it useful over the past years. And for a full and original method of this one, especially the GIS and Blender one, you can go to Daniel Huffman's website, who generously shared the Blender process step by step. I really thank Daniel Huffman for this method because he's such a generous cartographer. Here are samples of my work about relief shading. That's Philippines, and show the Pacific Ocean, Australia, Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand. And here I exaggerated the relief to just to show, let's say, the trenches like the Philippine Trench or the Marianas Trench, etc. That's Hawaii. Okay, here's an example for North America, also known as Turtle Island by its First Nations indigenous peoples. And here I use a layer from Tom Patterson and his friends project called Natural Earth and combined it with a relief, shaded relief relief output I generated through QGIS and Blender. And this is how it looks like in monochrome. The Marianas, same process, but this time applied to the seafloor. And it's good that there's open data about it. Actually, there's a big project right now to map the world's oceans. It also has its issues about data sovereignty and data privacy. But the data, a lot of the data about seafloor, the world seafloor is available. This is Wuhan and Saipan, and that's below. Our neighbors to the east. These are the other islands of Micronesia. Here's another one I made last year when I was in Chiang Mai in a workshop, and I removed the borders because borders are sometimes funny and not they were not made by us. There's a place in upland Southeast Asia called Zamia, home of many indigenous peoples who were cut by the empires and current nation states. Anyway, I also use the same method and materials like here. Read more about it, Zamia, by a very interesting anarchist author. Right. And then my maps, the recent, not really recent, some of the most popular ones. I mean, I'd like to tell a bit of story about this map too. This was very hard to make. It took me a week because I had to check the names and make sure that the indigenous names are there and prioritized, and also render each island one by one. And the files were very large, at least for my previous machine. And yeah, it took a week, but when it was finished, it's nice because number one, it went. So I finished it after so much labor and time. I was so exhausted. I think I started Friday the previous week and finished it the following Friday, and then I just uploaded it even to Reddit. And when I woke up in the next morning, people were saying, "Hey, David, it's it's front page of the internet. Your post." I'm like, "What?" So that paid off somehow, and it also is still paying off because I'm selling this in my online store. So if you want to support Filipino mapmaker, please go to mapmaker.myshopify.com and help fund my graduate studies. Anyway, 100 largest islands of the world, and I've started using the same methods about seafloor and terrestrial mapping in this place where I currently live, Aotearoa, New Zealand. The nice thing about this place is that you can even see these submarine rivers, which is amazing, and it's possible because of open data. This is free, and I think in the Philippines we should develop our capabilities more about open and safe geospatial data, so more people can experiment and create maps of their own places. Right. Okay. And here are more instances of the work: Aotearoa, also Madagascar, which I mentioned before. Right. Just for the cartography enthusiasts, the one of the I suppose I guess one of the things why this method has been very popular is because it's different from the previous technology or the previous functionalities of GIS software. So the one on the left, this is the one that was taught to me in uni, in college, in the UP Department of Geography, a bit more than 10 years ago. This is where you load an image file of elevation and then computer renders it. And then this one on the right is generated through Blender. And the difference here is not only the exaggeration and other things, but also the shadowing, let's say, within the valleys. And also, it looks softer and it looks more pleasant. Some people say it's natural. Of course, it's not. But the point is, it looks more striking, at least for me, a person who's been looking at relief maps for a decade now. Right? Where can I get the data? First, you need a digital elevation model, that raster image with the pixels and elevation values within each pixel. NASA offers lots of these data sets for free. Let's say from this specific project called the Shuttle Radar Topography Mission. Japan also offers similar datasets through its ALOS project. And what we call the hypsometric tint, the coloring, can come from sites like natural earth data. You can also generate that from the digital elevation model, but that tutorial might take a while. You can, in summary, that technique is you you use the elevation to generate colors. Let's say from 0 to 100 meters, it's green. From 100 to 200, it's yellow. Right. I would also like to acknowledge and recognize one of my inspirations in my work, Marie Tharp. She's a mathematician and a cartographer, and she's great because her work helped prove the theory of plate tectonics. She was mapping the world's oceans, and she wasn't recognized properly for it only until decades later. And she really inspired me to make maps like this. This is I made this in the style of her maps, and this one. Basically, during her time, she was plotting and mapping these using her mathematical expertise and also visual expertise. And then she noticed that when the her job was when she was in the lab, she was given ship logs about depth measurements. And during those times, it was even more sexist than today. She was not allowed to go to out to the field to collect. So she stayed in the lab and she did her math and she drew these mountains and she and her colleagues noticed that wait a minute, there are mountains on the seafloor. Why? And then they later connected it with the continental drift theory by Alfred Wegener. Let's say, why does South America fit with Africa? It's because there's this rift and there's motion. There's a process behind that, and Marie Tharp helped prove that, and that theory revolutionized lots of what we know today as planetary geology and geology. Right. This is how I'm trying to carry the work forward um, across islands of the Pacific, like Belau, our neighbors, Chuk in Micronesia, Bikini in Marshall Islands, also Marshall Islands, Majuro and Arno, Pohnpei in Micronesia, and Tahiti in what is currently known as French Polynesia. Right. So I'm done with talking now. I'm gonna show you a bit of action. I hope it's still recording. This is Quantum GIS, and what I'm showing to you now is the look and feel and how I generate the data. So for example, I'm gonna turn these layers off. There you go. So this is where the colors come from in one of the maps I showed. And here I set each elevation with range with a color and also used other layers from other sites, water polygons, water lines. These are from open data sites. Okay, maybe I should show you how it looks like in the just when you after you loaded it. So this is how it looks like, the digital elevation model. I think just after you load it into the software. Each of these pixels, I'm gonna zoom in, has an elevation value, and this has been correct. This data has been collected using remote sensing methods, which is not in my expertise. Right. And then after playing with the data set, with this data set in Quantum GIS or any other GIS software, you export it as an image file and then go to Blender. Oops. Open recent. Right. So here's a pre-made project where I followed Daniel Huffman's instructions about relief shading. It's a website I showed earlier, and set these settings. And I'm just gonna show you how it looks like when I'm rendering. Let's say Let's work on our islands. This one. Okay. I'm gonna show you how it looks like when it's exported. So this is it. This is the digital elevation model that the output that I'm going to render here. Render image. Please bear with me. This will be fast. It's just a small frame. Now you can see the software going through it subdivides the whole image to many parts and then renders them one by one. A quick commentary while this is rendering. It was very interesting to learn this 2 years ago because this really opened other opportunities for me. And I think that's why we need to be open about what is considered as legitimate mapping, because in my previous training, whether in the University of the Philippines, and I like the education there, whether in the University of London, we weren't really taught that Blender is a mapping or is very great tool for making maps. And sometimes you need people who think otherwise. They say, "Oops, what if you can use this other tool, which is, it also produces images and use it to make maps." And you end up with projects like this, which improves the craft. That's Panay Island, Negros Island, Cebu, Col, Leyte, Samar, Sbate, Romblon, Marinduque, Camiguin, Siquijor, Inabot Islands, Umanhon Island. That's where Magellan first landed. And he arrived, not discovered, but arrived in the Philippines, 1521. Anyway, so while this is rendering, oh my ocean, I miss the Philippines. Okay, this is how it looks like in my image editing software right now. I'm using Photoshop. So as you can see here in my layers, I'm trying to soften. I'm using different combinations. So that's very similar to this render. Just I just made it lighter. And my personal preference, and other cartographers have preference, is to have a bright shaded relief. So you can put this green here, which I prepared earlier, or just have the blues. Um, Here I use OpenStreetMap. So if you see here, these roads and in these lines, I did not make these layers. I loaded them through Quantum GIS using a custom OpenStreetMap layer, which is here on the side, exported it with the same similar frame as that of the islands, and then combined them, displayed with say transparency, or maybe the multiply uh, style of layering. It's up to you. It's up to your preference. Right? It's done. That's it. And then you just save the image. So that's my secret sauce. It's very straightforward. It just takes lots of patience because you need to render and then test and then combine and then do it again. And you have to wait. So for such a very so-called straightforward process, it takes many times of just repeating and repeating until you get the feel, until your customers or your users or stakeholders uh, like it, so to speak. Before, the mountains that I rendered were very dark, and I said, maybe you should see these valleys somewhere. So I adjusted the exaggeration and all those specifics that you can learn by going to Daniel Huffman's website. I'm gonna show it to you right now. Daniel Huffman shaded roof. Also, please support Daniel Huffman on Patreon if you want. So this is it. Okay, I think I've been talking for close to an hour now. Moving on. Let's go back. Right. Now let's talk about that layer that I talked about with the roads and the place names called OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap again is amazing. It's a Wikipedia of maps and it's made by people like you. And I really appreciate all the help and all the lessons I received from the OpenStreetMap community. I am both a member and also an academic of this community and project. And I would also like to thank my friends in OpenStreetMap Philippines for introducing the project to me because being part of OpenStreetMap really set me off to this journey of crowdsourced mapping where I'm learning so much. So there are many versions of OpenStreetMap. There's a remote version where people with their laptops, with the imagery, trace roads, buildings, and polygons. But that is not enough because we also need people who actually go out and tag the buildings and what's the name of this school or validate the location of this health center or ask the residents if the name of the barangay is correct, if the spelling is correct. And also we have the users. And a lot of them also support the project in terms of grants and also supporting lesson plans, contributing to the foundation that helps run OpenStreetMap. This is an example of how it looks like. And I think it's important that more Filipinos are introduced to the project in a managed way because we have so many needs in terms of disasters and urban development. And I think mapping can help us address those problems. As for me, I also do OpenStreetMap as a hobbyist. I love tracing reefs, not just man-made features, but natural features like the reefs in Samar. I didn't know there that the reef there was huge. I'm not sure if there's a name for it, but it looks like a barrier reef and me and my colleagues and people in the community are actually traveled here and studied the place after Typhoon Haiyan. All right, another demo. This is the last demo before the story. I'm just gonna show you how OpenStreetMap looks like. With OpenStreetMap, you can create a free account, and just using your desktop, you can edit places. Here you go. The the map tiles of OpenStreetMap. Gonna go to my favorite place in the world, Iwan Eastern Samar. This was the first town hit by Haiyan in 2013. And then there, if you click edit, you can remotely create points, lines, and polygons and tag them, relate them to each other, which is a whole topic in itself. But I'm just gonna show you a taste. So let's say here I want to update the buildings. Go to Sapao. Okay, so if you zoom in here, you can see that a lot of the buildings have already been traced. And sometimes the image matches, sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes corporations like Maxar provide the image for free for a limited amount of time and then they close it. So for example, after Haiyan, a lot of the imagery was provided for free. But then after the disaster, that service was closed. So now we're left with blurred imagery again. That's a whole other story. Right. So now I'm gonna draw this building. Da, da, da. Looks like a residential house for me because I used to travel this place a lot. Okay, so area, click the area, and then you can tag it as a building. And there are many tags. Click this, you can square it. There you go. And then, right, then I need to save it. Added buildings. Upload. Thank you for improving the map around Giwan Eastern Summer. Lastly, I'm gonna show you how I was editing. Oh, look at these. These are resettlement sites. Okay, the reefs. So here I did the same thing where I drew each of these reefs. Oh, there's more. I haven't finished. I'm gonna put a bit more. I love this place, so I'm just doing this bit by bit. Then you click, 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 double click, and then you can search for the tag here, the pre-made tags. And you can also request OpenStreetMap for tags, and there's going to be a discussion if you do that. And then you can have an approval or disapproval or modification, right? Anyway, added reefs. You can also, let's say, add forest areas if you can see it on the map, especially if you know the place. The good thing about OpenStreetMap community is that it honors local knowledge. It's very important for you to know the place, to map the place, which is very sweet, very, very commonsensical. All right. So now we're done with part two. Now I'm going to end with a geospatial story. We're close to the end now. Part three, a geospatial story about decolonization and community. Right. So now we're gonna go back to Typhoon Haiyan because I think it's an important experience for us as a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-historical nation, the Philippines. In 2013, Haiyan arrived and devastated the central parts of the Philippines. Back then, it was the strongest cyclone to make landfall not only in Philippine history, but in global history, in the recorded history of the world. Its winds were over 315 kilometers per hour, and it really changed many lives, including my life. It was also the place where in 1521, that place called Giwan, showed you where Typhoon Haiyan first landed in the Philippines. That was also the place where the colonizer explorer Magellan first arrived in the country in our Sea of Islands. So it's a very historical place. Also during World War II, it was the site, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, was the site of the largest naval battle in modern history. And whenever me and my friends there would talk, we would ask each other, what is it about this place? Colonialism, crisis, and climate change. The first, and it was a very painful part in the history of the nation. I think because of the obvious devastation and the deaths, but also the politics that ensued after. And it was really a test for our democracy. The death toll is this according to official records, but people say that it's more than that. Here's what happened behind the scenes. So days before the landfall, I was still teaching in the University of the Philippines, and there's this group called OpenStreetMap Philippines. That's Maning, and that's Jude, my housemate, and Erica and Andre and many others who were there helping map the places before the typhoon came. We were tracing the buildings and the villages that were to be uh, back then were about to be hit by the typhoon. It was because the maps later would prove useful for humanitarian response and also a bit for the recovery and reconstruction. And this is how it looked like in the coordination phase in the mapping of Typhoon Haiyan, where volunteers, hundreds of volunteers every day for I think for months, uh, were were helping the Philippines using OpenStreetMap. And this is how the maps looked like before the mapathons, the mapping hackathons, and then after the mapping hackathons. You can see there are more buildings here and more other features. Let's go back to Giwan Eastern Summer. And I think some of you who have been following my story have already heard this hundreds of times, but I think I need to honor the people of Giwan by telling this story too and help amplify their voice. When Cyclone Haiyan happened, there's this island called Victory Island in Giwan. It's just a small island, about maybe 200 meters long and maybe 20 meters wide in some places. And it was really devastated. And there's this part here at the bottom that when we were there, when we talked to the residents there, they told us that um, a lot of the people here were their bodies were never found. They were killed by the cyclone. And the tragedy is not only was not only geophysical in terms of the cyclone. The tragedy was also political because the national government, in response to the disaster, declared that all places hit by Yolanda will have a 40-meter no-build zone. It sounds very straightforward and simple, but it was too simple. Why? Because if you look at this island, the no-build zone covers most of it. And when we went there a couple of times and talked with the people, and we lived in Giwan for more than a year, people were saying, explaining to us about their lives in the island, that it's not as simple as you cannot live there anymore. Because if you could see here, the place is full of reefs, and the people are there because of the food, because of the fish, because of livelihood. So this is Victor Island in OpenStreetMap, and that's Maning, which is that's him as a mapper, one of the mappers of this island. And you can see here it's surrounded by reefs. And though even if it's just a small island, there's food in the place. And where there's food, there's people. On the other side, in the government, while we were helping in the recovery and reconstruction of the towns as map makers and urban planners, we had to look at the previous data sources. And when we checked, let's say, with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in their topographic maps, asking for data, the place is just a coral. So for us, we were thinking this is such an injustice. You have a people devastated by, erased by a cyclone, survived colonialism despite attempts at erasure, survived and prospered. And then in the government maps, it's just a coral, also erased. So these are multiple kinds of injustice if you think about it. Anyway, so we decided to move forward with the residents and live with them, talk with them, listen to them, and we were making maps with them, not just for them. And we use OpenStreetMap and other uh, open source technologies, and also try to understand the place a little bit better. So, for example, if you look here, um, we were walking in Victoria Island, our team, to understand why people stay despite the disaster. And during one of the visits, we asked them about this particular spot. Said, "Hey, what is it about that spot?" And then they told us, "Well, here we're trying to adapt. That's garbage. That's rubbish, and then we're using rubbish to reclaim more spaces in the island." And for a moment, I thought, as a very privileged person from Luzon of Kapampangan and Tagalog, this, and I thought this is very maladaptive. I thought it was wrong because who would put garbage to reclaim an island? But then, if you go back to the context, people are really trying, doing their best to survive. So I'm not justifying environmental pollution, but I think, again, going back to my previous arguments, that in the act of mapping, in the act of producing geographical knowledge, it is very important to politicize and contextualize and socialize the analysis so we can really find ways forward. So at that point, the way forward that we thought, okay, it looks like people are not going away. There's food there. It's for their survival, and people are rooted in place. There's trauma that's associated when people are uprooted from where they come from. We said, okay, let's help with the evacuation procedures. So with the communities, we help make these maps, and we laminated the maps. We put them in printed in tarpaulin because uh, there's a lack of internet access, and if you live in this place, it's better to have something that's durable, like a map in laminated format, tarpaulin map. It rains compared to paper maps. It's still there. So that's Miko, one of the best map makers in the world, talking with the residents, with the team, with his expertise. And then the year later, there was another typhoon. So in that particular town called Giwan, because of the efforts of everyone and mapping is included there, the evacuation was done, and there were zero casualties. And I'm very happy about this part of the work. So we didn't save the world or save people, and there's still cyclones anyway. But I thought in that moment that that was the doable thing to help with the evacuation, and mapping was part of that story, right? But the story does not end there. Uh, After Haiyan, I went to the UK for a year to study geospatial analysis in University College London, and then went back to serve our peoples again. And this was one of the first jobs I took when I got back after the Marawi siege. This is a photo I took with my friend GR Dizon, who's also a planner and a GIS specialist, GIS expert in the so-called ground zero. It was it's a very traumatic place, especially for the residents. And I found the work there very challenging and also very enlightening at the same time. Right. I just want to show you this photo as a summary because I'm still processing everything that happened, and the story is not yet done, so to speak. And a lot of the stories is not mine to tell. But there was this particular moment when you were doing the mapping, not just for residents, but with the residents, with the survivors, with the local officials who are also survivors, that we had to step back and let the people map. And there were also moments where, because the act of mapping made people remember and triggered memories of the bombings and very traumatic experiences, very painful, that we had to stop. And at that moment, I thought maybe I should just listen. So the point I'm trying to make here is mapping is not just about representation or pragmatic aspects, or not just about power, but it's also about care. And there are moments when the right thing to do is to not make a map, or maybe I shouldn't make the map. So in that project, I and my colleagues took more of a backseat approach, where we encourage people to make maps on their own, also not map when it's very uncomfortable to map. And I hope this offers a way forward for people who will go into this kind of career in crisis mapping. And we know in the Philippines, we always have crisis. Uh, I'm arguing for a more sensitive kind of making maps, not just for, but with communities. Let's go back to this guy, Magellan. So let's go back to the stories that we're told. We are told that Europeans mapped the world, and then they did. But I think we need a better story, because this story is not told to us. The story of the Austronesians, the greatest navigators in the world. We have their DNA and we have their experience. It's in our blood. And if you look across the Pacific, there are so many words in common, like the word mata. Here in Aotearoa, I was surprised. Uh, People use lima, rima, or in Kapampangan, matwa. For elderly, they also use the word matwa and many other words. So I think there's really uh, we need to spend more time as a people relating our experiences as Filipinos to the rest of the Pacific in terms of geographic knowledge, because the relatives of our ancestors, the Micronesians, people who are later called Micronesians but were really close, made these maps, the stick charts, and these stick charts were not about borders; they were about connections between the islands. And these were educational materials for young navigators. These were used by the old navigation masters when they were teaching the next generation to navigate at sea without GPS. And for me, that is an amazing story. This is also mapping. Going back to this to this person, the problem is the stories that were told are still very Eurocentric. So it's true that they made maps and he made maps. This is the geographer by Johan Vermeer. Uh, but the stories remain very problematic. This is an important moment last year. I was in Oxford for 2 weeks in a PhD summer program by the Oxford Internet Institute, and at the same time there was this exhibit. And there I saw one of the stick charts, and I was very emotional, very very happy. But then this was the curation. Here is a stick chart like in the past and in the future. This is the British map of the Pacific Ocean. And if you read that part here in the description by the creator, it said there that Pacific navigation traditions declined in response to the Western colonization of the ocean. I will repeat that. In response to. I think it's not honest because the Pacific navigation traditions in the Pacific of our ancestors declined not only in response to, but because of colonization. So the story matters. And then recently, there was a documentary made by Amazon and its humanitarian nonprofit partner, Hotawasam, about mapping the Philippines. And the producers, the editors, and whoever wrote the script wrote a very problematic narrative. Three white guys going to the Philippines are gonna save the Philippines. They even used metaphors like in the old days there were medieval maps with monsters, and there are people in the dark who must be enlightened. So it's a very colonial telling of the story. So we protested against that, and then Amazon took the video down. This was just I think a month ago. So those tropes, colonial tropes, which are not very honest, are still being used against us today, against existing map makers. Their labor was erased here and was not really recognized and appreciated. They were mapping Guagua, where I one of the places I grew up. Right. So the specter of the colonial mapmaker industry is still with us today, even in how the story of the first circumnavigation of the world is being told. Actually, when when Magellan and his crew were going around the world, they were cheating. They were using the expertise of one of our ancestors called and later called Enrique of Malacca. He's from Southeast Asia, and they took him and went around the world. So when they went to the Philippines, Enrique could talk to to our peoples. And so apparently, it's not them who first circumnavigated the world. It's Enrique, who is our ancestor. So you could see, yes, they have the world, but they tell terrible stories and which are not very honest. So I'm just laughing first because it's 3 a.m. here, but also just as a reminder to everyone that we really need to spend more time reclaiming our geographical knowledge, geographical abilities, and geographical stories. Okay, for a bit of hope, let's go back to Marawi and this story. I think this should be over, and to the right should be the future. I I still feel very hopeful for our peoples because despite everything, colonization, war, capitalism, patriarchy, etc., we are still here. I am still here telling you these stories. We are told this very interesting story that Filipinos are poor in geographic knowledge. And sometimes it's true. Like there's someone who thinks that Mayon volcano is in Naga. That's not good. But we should also know that geographic knowledge is more than maps. And there are many Filipino map makers leading great projects right now. We need to challenge that story that we are poor in geographic knowledge and we need to support Filipino map makers. So thank you so much for listening to me. And thank you so much for this opportunity to have this masterclass. Projects like mental health awareness, mapping mental health services even before the pandemic, and Mapbex, queer mapping. They're launching big mapping hackathons, engaging so many people even during the pandemic, and I think you should support them. Also, very soon we're gonna have Pistana Mapa. It's a Philippine mapping conference. Hopefully, it's the biggest one. Please register. Please submit a talk and approach us. Email us. Please register. It's free. We're gonna make maps for everyone. And also this collective called the Ministry of Mapping. So it's organization slash collective that we're nurturing for the next generation of Filipino map makers. I'm very passionate about this because I'm away from the Philippines. I've been away for a while, and I thought this is one of the ways that I could support our peoples even remotely, wherever destiny takes me. Right. So I'm gonna end now. Please remember that it is not just the maps that matters. Who makes the maps and tells the stories about the mapping matter too. I'm gonna borrow a quote from one of my favorite authors from here in Oceania, Epeli Hau'ofa, Our Sea of Islands. Let's remember that we are the sea. We are the ocean. We must wake up to this ancient truth and together use it to overturn all hegemonic views that aim ultimately to confine us again, physically and psychologically, in the tiny space that we have resisted accepting as our soul appointed places, and from which we have recently liberated ourselves. We must not allow anyone to belittle us again and take away our freedom. There's a popular saying across the Pacific, if you want to know where you're going, then remember where you came from. Salamat po ng marami, and let's be on this decolonial journey together.
Very interesting work, David. I find it particularly interesting how similar you really look like Jose Rizal. So for
Historical.
sure, I'll open street maps later and do some exploring myself, and I want to invite the audience to do the same. But before we go right ahead to our fireside chat, I asked a question earlier. It's a poll question. In the age of COVID-19, what map would you be most interested in making? Areas with fast internet, grocery and pharmacy accessibility, human food traffic, testing facilities, or hospitals?
Right. Shall I
So,
answer that now?
sorry.
Is that addressed to me? The question is addressed to me.
Oh no, this is the poll question we asked the audience.
All right. Okay. Let's wait for it.
So yeah, one thing's for sure, we all have different needs during this quarantine. As we're facing the crisis, it's very important we also do our part and stay safe as possible. Now, David, are you ready for our fireside chat?
Yeah. Let's do this.
Yeah. Okay, but before we move to the question, there was the poll, and I'd like to show you what the results were. In the age of COVID-19, what map would you be most interested in making?
Mm.
The first option, fast internet areas, scored 21%. Grocery and pharmacy access scored 29%. Food traffic, nobody voted for food traffic at all. Um, Testing facilities and hospitals, 50%. Are you surprised with this result?
Mm, Siyempre, spur of the moment, I think I understand yung 50% at testing facilities and hospitals. In fact, when the
Yeah,
pandemic started, the mapping teams that I've been volunteering with, OpenStreetMap, etc., this is the first one of the first features that we had to map. Nasan yung mga hospital, and then from there, people diversified. Where's the food? Where's the water supply?
that's very true. That's very true. So we do have some questions also from our viewers, David, from both Facebook and Echo Hub. So if you don't mind, let's get right into it. Towards the end of the presentation, you mentioned stories, no? And I love how you're talking about the stories in each of your map conquests, right? Do you mind sharing one that allowed you to get into this field?
Okay, right. There are few moments. It's a bit sentimental too. I really honor being part of a family. So, for example, my mother, who is a fisheries scientist, when I was the only kid with three boys. She was doing her masters, and then she always took me to her field trips and field works, Zambales, to the mangroves, etc. So I think that really exposed me to geography and the love of places, the love of our islands, and that carried on towards my uni training. One of them was, I remember one of my geomorphology field classes with Professor Trina Listang, one of my first ones. I came from political science, and then midway I shifted to geography and went to that field class. And then she took us to Curimao in Ilocos Norte. And then we were on the beach, and then we saw corals, but they were not underwater, they were above water. And then she took us to this small hill, and the corals were there. So I said, this is such an amazing thing to learn, to ask questions about what you see, about the landscape, because there's a story behind that. It used to be, it means that the place used to be underwater. And then another very memorable training or moment I had was when I was 18 years old, and our instructors taught us how to do fieldwork sa Sierra Madre. So there we were interacting with barangay officials, the Dumagat peoples, our indigenous brothers and sisters, the military too. And this was before Ondoy, I remember. This was the summer of 2009. So Ondoy was September, right? And it was a big disaster for Manila. But months before that, we were actually in Sierra Madre and interviewing and understanding the place. And we traced the source, one of the sources of the problem. It's because the forest is mismanaged, and the indigenous peoples, who are the better protectors and guardians, do not have the power over the forest. So you have illegal logging, yung pagbebenta ng kaingin, hindi na kaingin, ng uling sa Marikina, the encroaching subdivisions which were changing the land. So when Ondoy happened, the runoff was faster, and because the trees were gone, and the people who were protecting it didn't have so much power anymore, both because of our colonial history and our neo-colonial present, which is the current setup and laws in the DNR plus plus plus. So for me, these are very important awakenings that I have from my mom, to my first transition from political science to job, and then to my fieldwork, which I later carried to urban planning sa Hayan. That's why it sounds very uncomfortable to talking to me sometimes, because I really see geography not just in terms of data, but in terms of stories, in terms of power, interests, culture. And I think I just want to put that front and center.
Very nice sentiment. I love that. There's a human side to the science behind it.
Mm.
And with regards to the collection of data, I know it must be quite tedious.
Mm.
What are the challenges you face collecting data in the digital age as compared to in the olden days, quote unquote, where it was more analog?
Right. About those olden days, I'm just 30 years old. But sometimes when you say, nung panahon namin, we actually had to go out, and people still do this as surveyors do. Let's say in partnership with the local government, mapping for environmental plan or a land use plan. you have to go to map the rivers and the forests, and you actually have to go and be there. So me and my friends, colleagues, students, we had to walk maybe for over 2 weeks every day for 8 hours a day, just to actually be there and tag this is over. But now it's become faster because of projects like OpenStreetMap. The satellite imagery is there. Before it was so hard to access that. OpenStreetMap started 2004 in UCL, in University College London. And the challenge though is that while we appreciate the speed, I appreciate that, and the lower costs, I am also careful about how that translates into work and employment, because we know the context of the world today, it's by default oppressive and there are many powerful actors out there. And the Philippines has a huge labor supply, very skilled labor supply, and very eager young people. And I express this to my colleagues so that what if 10 years from now we become like the mapping click farms? And for me, that's one thing that we should guard about, because there's so many experts in the Philippines now, and those my friends have already left, who were so frustrated with how the economy appreciated and paid their expertise. So I think that's I'm gonna put that front and center, that it is very important for us to work on these issues about digital labor and inequalities, because the trends are really, really, really strong. On the practical side, so that's the systemic side. On the personal side, I think community is very important. And so I'm very thankful for my colleagues in OpenStreetMap Philippines, in FOSFORG, Ministry of Mapping, and many more. Because despite the precarity and despite the issues, we somehow find ways to, sometimes we get paid, sometimes we don't. We are a support system too. We are also an education system. So there's a tech question, we ask it from our colleague who gives it for free. And what the community does now is creating these opportunities for people who are unable to access the education that I was able to access. So I think that's a challenge too, how to make do with what we currently have in terms of nurturing our community of map makers.
Thank you. Very good answer. With the emergence of digital mapping tools, it provides you a faster way of collecting data, we know, right? But do you think machines can eventually replace local communities or human knowledge?
Mm-mm. A classic problem. You'll see these if we look at. Thanks for the question. It's very timely. If you look at the history of automation, let's just start from uh, post World War II or Cold War era. These questions have been posed time and again. But as we can see, whether it's in before when the paper maps were being converted into digital maps, or now that we are relying more on AI and machine learning to classify rivers, polygons, basic geographic features, we still need humans. We still need domain knowledge, like foresters, indigenous peoples who actually live there, or just an ordinary mapping of a barangay. We still need to make sure that the name of the sari-sari store is correct. Someone has to actually go there still. And data costs are also high. So despite all the optimism that is becoming more high resolution, faster, big data, all that, all the hype and the buzzwords, um, may entropy pa rin. There's still entropy. We really can't map everything high resolution without high money costs, high energy costs. So with that, my view is more, what's the term from my friend Munagenda? I am a progressimist. I am a pessimist. I know the problematic history, but also I do that to find ways forward. So one of the way forward that I've been thinking about recently is, okay, the Philip we it's so hard to stop these trends about, let's say, urbanization and digitalization. It's very strong historical force. So how do you mitigate that? We need to strengthen our collectives, the design collectives, for example. I've seen that and this is why I'm thankful to be associated with the Design Center of the Philippines, because before I didn't really think of myself as a designer. And then I was exposed to the community, and I saw collectives within creative industry, um, who pulled their resources, and that's an idea behind, let's say, Pista ng Mapa, or Ministry of Mapping, or OpenStreetMap Philippines.
Thank you. So let's go now to some of the Facebook questions. These is from the audience, from Antonio Marie Sidayao. How do we integrate historical context, human adaptation, and spatial innovation in mapping?
Mm. Thank you. Big words for me. So, ano ulit po yung tatlo? Historical context.
Historical context, human adaptation, and
Mm-mm.
spatial innovation in mapping.
Innovation. All right. Big words. I'm gonna provide a very simplistic answer. I think it's very important that in the midst of these, um, in this context, the need for us to innovate, to move forward, also the need for us to hold on to our identity and history at the same time. It's important to build good relationships with the communities we work for as we do that. Why? I'll go back to my message about the colonial map making. The colonial kind of map making is very extractive. Hihigupin niya lahat ng kaya niyang higupin doon sa tao, doon sa bayan, sa dagat, at sa lugar. So pupunta si kumpanya, kunin niya lahat, aalis na siya, bye-bye, yayaman siya. The counterpoint that I'm trying to make is, maybe it's time for us to develop a very Filipino kind of way, which is also within us, yung bayanihan, etc., which is more relational. So let's say in the US, they have this concept called the data trusts, where the geospatial data and other open data is owned by the community. And so if someone is going to make money out of that, there has to be benefits to the community. Hindi siya, it's not just one way extraction, because right now that's the default model. Okay, we're gonna make open data, we're gonna free it for the world, but the playing field and the setup is still very unequal, because even if we, let's say, build a data commons or a tech commons, but there are no legal structures to guarantee that cycling back of resources to the community, we might not be able to prosper. So big question, big answer.
Very
Naisipan
big.
ko din yung concept na the data trusts, kasi pagod na din. For example, Yolanda. So I was part of the aid industry. I'm still part of it, and I've even if I lived there for a while, and I'm not Waray, I'm not Bisaya. Whenever we went to communities and did the surveys, did the map, there's this what we call assessment fatigue and survey fatigue. When we come to the house and people say, "Oh, you're gonna map us again, survey us again, ulit-ulit na lang," and people really feel disenfranchised by the data creation process and the design process. So why did I why did I say that? I don't want that to be repeated, hopefully. And we should find ways to have this more reciprocal relationship, even between Filipino technology designers and the Filipino communities that we serve. Otherwise, the danger is we are going to reproduce colonization, which is yung higup lang ng higup.
Thank you. So there's another question here. This is from Elmer Trunks. Is there a cartography society in the Philippines? How do you
Yeah,
relate or
okay.
connect Google Map teams or others?
All right. What's the next part of the question, please? Can you repeat that? So
So
I've
it's a
heard the,
two-part question.
yeah,
Is there a cartography society in the Philippines? And how do you relate or connect to Google Map teams or others?
right. So the first part, I don't think there's an official cartographic society like, say, the North American Cartographic Society or the British Cartographic Society. Um, there is a map collector society, which is amazing. They usually publish very nice anthologies and indices, and there was this book, Philippine Cartography, by that society, very well annotated. Um, so that's the closest that we have, I suppose, to a cartographic society, more in the map collection. There's also a Philippine Geographical Society based in my former Department of Geography, and there are many MAPI associations around. like Association of Surveyors, Association of um, Geomatics Engineers, etc. And this is where I transition to the next question: how do I connect with mapping communities? Uh, Actually, just looking back, I found the connections not within the disciplines of geography, but because of the meetups I went to. So during that time, I think 2010, 11, 12, anong mas bata pa tayo, I was really energized by going to the tech meetups, design meetups, the user experience meetups. And there I met people who worked on Google Maps. And the interesting thing is they did not have a formal geography education, but Google Maps and related tech was their entry point to later becoming geospatial developers. And that's a nice thing. And again, I might be over promoting here, but I think it's time for us peoples of the Philippines to have a more like a federation of these organizations so we can pool resources and share opportunities to all.
Thank you. So we have one last question. Do you have maps that you're eyeing to create in the future? What are they?
Oh yeah, there's one map that I want to make not just a single author but as part of a community. Do you remember the stick chart that I showed you
Yeah.
from our Micronesian relatives? Uh, First, it's a tragedy that we were not taught about that in college. Even me in my education in UP, um, I think it's partly because historically we have thought of ourselves and we were told that the Philippines is disconnected from the rest. Like, are we Asian or are we are we Pacifica? It's never-ending Twitter debates about that. Um, but I think we are all children of the ocean, and in fact, uh, that art or way of knowing has to be reclaimed and revitalized. Because if you look at the history of, I want to make that the six are remake them. Because if you look at the art of wayfinding, and I have limited knowledge about it, the navigator has to spend years feeling the ocean and feeling how the waves and related phenomenon wrap around the islands. And I think it's just shows the truth that our ancestors were scientists too, because that is science. You observe, you go back to test, and then you go back to test your records. Sometimes you share the knowledge. And I think it's a very decolonial way of respective way of making knowledge about the world. And sure, we really can't bring back the past anymore. But believe me or not, anthropologists, say from Harvard, and ethnographers are studying wayfinders and carrying with them instruments, geoscience instruments, and these navigators with that map in their mind of the structures and the islands, they're measuring their capabilities as they navigate the ocean without GPS. And then nagtutugma yung observation nila. And if you think about it, some of my colleagues tell me this has implications, let's say, sa quantum physics, about how waves operate. And I just want to be part of that journey. I don't want to be the best navigator in the world, etc. But I would really like to, as an academic and also a child of this ocean, to contribute to that. So that's very clear to me. And it's very funny that destiny brought me to Aotearoa to realize, oh, oops, I got it wrong. There's this missing knowledge that wasn't passed. Actually, it brings me to my life back in Giwan. May kapitbahay ako noon na mangingisda. And then every night, when we were drinking tanduay ram, he would tell me, "Oh, David, you're from Manila. You think you're educated, but believe me, if I take you out to the ocean, you wouldn't survive." But for me, said my friend, yung kapitbahay namin, I just put my saliva on my finger and then I put it up, and then I know where the wind blows. And people there were telling stories about magical cities at Nagbiringan. And later, anthropologists uh, show, or let's say, there's this anthropology expert, Mimi George, who worked with peoples here in Oceania, in so-called Melanesia. And cities at night that people in Samar saw, the magical cities, the navigators there also see those lights in the islands at night. So for me, there's something there that we don't really understand about the ocean. And again, I'm just geeking out and over romanticizing the past. Um, but that is very clear to me. I'm gonna contribute to that journey.
So actually, we can do one more question, and I'd like to ask if you can dig deeper on the rise of collaborative mapping.
Right. Mm, okay. Where do we start? Collaborative mapping. We can start from. So this is the usual story. The usual story was before governments controlled the information, and then came the open source activists, also the open society movements. Let's say groups funded by the Open Society, George Soros, etc., who were promoting a certain democratic project, Western democratic project, and OpenStreetMap was born out of that. So let's say in the UK, there was a time when the Ordnance Survey, the national mapping agency of the UK, didn't really share data that much. So Steve Coase and his colleagues in London created OpenStreetMap, which is a collaborative mapping project where, okay, since you don't want to share maps with us, but we're the citizens, we're stakeholders, we're going to make our own map. So it's a political response that's triggered by the rise. On the other hand, I wouldn't also limit the story to the white guys. While their contribution was important, I think the work, let's say, of humanitarian mappers around the world is also very important. So over the past few years, because of many disasters around the world, mappers, let's say from Kathmandu when they had the earthquake, uh, in Haiyan too, and let's say during the Ebola response in Western Africa, there was really a huge need for basic geographic data to be made available very, very quickly. And that impetus about humanitarianism, I think I argue, is a very strong driving force, even right now. So, for example, the nonprofit that I talked about, and I'm also a part of it, the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, wants to uh, map the unmapped, so to speak, to map 1 billion people around the world over the next or so years. And I think that's going to be a very strong trend. Another force is the corporate force. So right now, I'm talking about OpenStreetMap. Companies like Facebook, Microsoft, etc., are also pitching in to the OpenStreetMap project because let's say let's just stick to Facebook. Facebook uses geospatial services. When you create events, when you check in, they also need to associate your behavior and you as a product, me as a product, with the geospatial locations and target you. And we need geospatial data about that. So I argue that another deeper reason is this attention economy that uh, geospatial information through collaborative mapping is part of that industry, how to manage people's attention marketing, etc. So I hope I answered that in a straightforward way.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, but before we end this session, David, would you like to have some closing statements and maybe share with the audience how they can reach you?
Oh yeah, I'm available. I apologize to everyone who supported me over the years because I don't really reply in social media, but I do reply through email. It's just very hard to do a PhD and serve the country at the same time. But let's keep in touch because I really look forward to the day when I can go home finally safely after doing all of this. Also, I would like to uh, do a shout out to my best friends in the world, Nico, DJ, Andy, and Angel, and people in JR, people I worked with through the years, especially in Haiyan and Marawi. That was a very formative phase in our life. Sure, it traumatized us, but also it gave us opportunities to be stronger. And I credit a lot of, I might look like, sometimes I am surprised that I am offered opportunities to have a masterclass wherein I really see my journey as a map maker as only one of many journeys we, the map making community in the Philippines, are together. sharing knowledge, helping each other. And I think it's important to recognize that. And I think it's a very decolonial way of explaining your success, whatever that means. Because in the old days, there's this single author, male map maker, blah blah blah, with the painting or nice work. I think it's a lot of labor there is erased. Actually, the old guilds of Europe, those old masters, cartographic masters, had a whole workshop working for them to make those maps. And I think these days that's the mindset that we have. So I suppose, the last thing that I want to say is, let's really take care of each other. Mapping is going to be very important, and let us make sure that as we transition and navigate into this digital geography that is marching towards Philippines right now, and transforming all parts of the economy, let's really make sure that we prosper and we increase our power as a people. That's all.
Thank you so much. So that ends our session with David Garcia. Again, thank you, David, for such an informative talk. As we close this session, I would also like to thank our official partners: Adobo Magazine, our official media partner; Buensalido Architects and British Council, our event partners. Thank you again. We'll be having another session this evening. I do hope you'll all be able to join us. It's another masterclass. Georgia Lupi of Pentagram USA will be discussing about the human side of data later at 9 p.m. So goodbye and have a great day. Thank you, everyone.